Welcome back to another episode of Containers on the Couch. And today we have an exciting episode on an actually interesting product, which I actually love as well. But before we go into the name, it's called Finch, but we'll go into the name and what it actually does in a second. I want to introduce my two wonderful guests, Phil Estes and Olly Pomeroy. Phil, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, what you do at LES.
Sure. Yeah. Great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm a principal engineer embedded within the Container Compute organization, so Fargate, ECS, and our sister organizations, the Registry and EKS. Focus mostly on upstream open source around container runtime. So I've been a maintainer of Containerd, and before that Docker. And excited to be here today.
Awesome. Olly, you've been a guest on the show, but introduce yourself to for people who don't know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So hey, everybody. My name is Olly Pomeroy. I'm a developer advocate here at AWS, and I sit in the container services team. So I do work on Fargate and all various parts of the container runtime project.
Awesome. And my name is Mesail Casing. I'm a developer advocate for the container services team as well. Work with Olly on the same team. And today we're going to be talking about Finch. Finch is a bird, if I remember correctly. Is that true or not?
Yes.
It is a bird, but it's also something else. So what is Finch that we're going to be talking about? And why 1.0? In other words, is there different versions of different birds? Or actually, what is Finch? So let's go for that. Let's start with that one.
Yeah, I could take that, or Olly.
Yeah. I guess I can do it. So yeah, so Finch is a container development tool, or more likely a tool you can use to develop applications in containers. So it's something that would run on your developer workstation. So right now your Mac OS machines, and hopefully very soon on your Windows machines, and it allows you to run Linux containers locally. So you can package up your applications into container images and push them off to registries and really kind of the inner loop side of container development.
And it runs only Linux containers, or not? I assume when we run a container, we can pretty much package what we want. But I assume the Finch, as the way as a local development tool, is only running currently on Linux and Mac OS, I assume.
Yes. So what Finch does, so most developers out there today, and there's like some really interesting surveys out there that kind of talk about what machines people use as their like daily workstations, but most developers actually end up using like Mac OS machines or Windows machines as their primary interface, but they're developing applications that will end up running on Linux servers or in software containers packaged up and then running on Linux servers. And to work with that locally, developers on their Mac OS or Windows machines need a Linux kernel, needs a Linux environment. So Finch and the whole suite really of container development tools basically provide a local Linux environment. So run a virtual machine on your laptop or on your desktop that has a Linux kernel, and then allows you to build software containers. And it's all around making the experience between your native system and that Linux virtual machine as seamless as possible. Like you don't want to have to be like SSHing in and out of that virtual machine every time you want to build a container, or like transferring your files
using
around.
Vagrant as we used to do once upon a time, a long time ago.
Right. So you want to make that a seamless experience as possible, and there's lots of awesome tools in this space, and Finch is an example of one of those.
So Phil, you say you've been working on upstream. I assume there are tools around which do this.
Yeah, I mean,
what do we want to do with Finch? Why did we start? Why did we create this tool? And of course, it's an open source tool which anybody can use, contribute, and provide feedback, feature requests, whatever else it is. But why did we create this tool?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, here at AWS, we have a container runtime team that is actually contributing to Containerd as an upstream open source project. We consume it then within Fargate, then EKS. Obviously, anywhere Docker is used, Containerd is a part of Docker's installed stack. So some people are aware, but some people may not be aware that when you're using even Docker Engine or Docker Desktop, there's Containerd underneath Docker, and there's runc, which is the actual executor that starts and stops those processes on the Linux operating system. So we already had expertise in Containerd. We're already using it broadly within our services. And we're active sort of in the broader community that's grown around Containerd, which includes a fellow maintainer who built nerdctl, which has a common command line that people are used to if they've used Docker. So it was really out of this expertise and our own usage that we wanted to build a tool that aligned with the uses we're having for Containerd. So having that local development environment that uses Containerd directly, just like Fargate uses Containerd directly. And so one of the nice sort of capabilities that's come out of that is when we built Sochi Snapshotter to do lazy loading images. And I think Olly will take us through a demo later, but we were then able to actually offer that within Finch as well. So we can, because they're both built on Containerd, again, sort of building on this expertise and community involvement we already had. There's just a nice synergy to have our container developer tool using the same runtime components that our production services here at AWS use.
Yeah, cool. And Phil mentioned Sochi. For our viewers, of course, please say hello in the chat. Welcome back to joining us on the show. What is Sochi? It's not the place somewhere where we remember we once upon a time had Olympics in the winter somewhere. It's something different, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sochi is seekable OCI, and it's basically an image management plugin, what we call a snapshotter for a Containerd. And it allows us to lazy load container images. So really start container images quicker than downloading the full image up front. We can lazy load it. We can only download data on demand. We did a whole Containers from the Couch episode on it if people are interested.
Yes, we did.
Shameless plug.
And I'll find the link for that afterwards while we're talking. But yes, for sure.
Awesome.
And Anthony McDuck, hi to you too. Thank you very much for joining us. So let me ask a question for you. I mentioned on some of the tweet or the title for the episode. This is 1.0. So I assume it's not the first release we're doing of Finch. So can you tell us a little about what we've done up until now, and we'll get more into what the actual new things which have come out with Finch 1.0. What was that release?
Yeah, absolutely. So Finch was a project that we open sourced near enough a year ago. So last November, just before reInvent 2022, and we released it quite early in its life cycle, and we kind of wanted to get it out there and say this is what we're thinking about. This is what we're kind of working on. We didn't expect kind of everyone to go out and adopt it day one. It was kind of the blueprints of what we're thinking about. And then over the past year, we've then been constantly iterating on it, refining on Finch, adding new features, or maybe contributing upstream to the various projects that Finch packages up and depends on. And then sort of after sort of 12 months now of developing on Finch, we were quite confident in its stability. We were quite confident in its feature set, and so what we've done now is cut a 1.0 release and said it's generally available, and as Phil called it in his launch blog, it's ready for flight. Awesome.
Yeah, I remember that one. And Vikram actually asked a question which I'd like to get your. How easy is it to use it? I mean, do you need to learn a whole new syntax? Is it a different tool, easy to install? What is the actual tool? What is the ease of use?
Yeah, I mean, I think the expectation is that many people are familiar with the common command line that Docker popularized of I type Docker build or Docker run or Docker push or pull. This set of commands which, as Olly mentioned, like there's multiple tools out there providing this command set and these same flags. So if you're familiar with any of those, then using Finch, you don't have to learn any new commands, any new flags. As sort of combined with that, so that's what you can do with Finch is again expected to be the same set of operations and activities you would do with any other container build tool in your local environment. What we tried to also do is package it in such a way that it's very easy to install. So we made a single, Mac OS install package that's signed. So there's no funky things you have to do to say, oh, I downloaded this from the internet. Ignore, that you don't know who this developer is. So it's a signed installable package that gets the VM installed for you, installs all the tools you need inside the VM, and does lifecycle management of upgrades, so you don't lose images you've downloaded or containers you have. And as Olly said, we've been sort of to make that as easy as possible, to make upgrades smoother, to make the startup time faster. There's a lot of great work that the team has done to hopefully make it a very simple tool to install and use. And we also had community members put it in Homebrew, I think within a week or two of our initial launch. And so if you install usually your tools via Homebrew, then it's just as easy as brew install Finch.
Cool. And I actually want to ask a question because I'm not sure that everybody might be completely aware of how this actually works. Before I do that, I want to say yes, hi, Spicy Corsair, for joining us from Seattle. And thank you very much, Kyle Quest, for, yes, we're very excited about the 1.0 release. You talked about a VM. So how does this actually work? So when I, for example, run Finch build a command, it doesn't actually build it on my hardware, on my Mac or my Linux machine, which is running, or it does something else interact. So you said we built a virtual machine. So how does it actually work?
Yeah, really good question. You mind if I share my screen real quick? I think
of course. One second. There we go.
Oh, perfect. There you go.
And if you can make it a tiny bit bigger, would be better for everybody else's eyes and the old people like me that can't see properly.
I can do that. Yeah, absolutely. So for those that haven't come across it yet, runfinch.com is Finch's website. RunFinch is the GitHub organization where you'll find all of the code, including the website. And we'll talk through the various layers of the stack in a moment, but like really Finch is, you could kind of see it as packaging up lots of awesome open source components to create the development tool. And as you kind of mentioned, so on a Mac OS workstation, we're running a Linux virtual machine on a hypervisor. We're taking advantage of a project called Limo, which is a CNCF sandbox project created by Akihiro, who's one of the Containerd maintainers, as the way in which that we provision those virtual machines. You can either use the QEMU hypervisor to create that virtual machine, or on some of the newer versions of Mac OS now, they actually have a native hypervisor called the virtualization framework, which you could use to create that virtual machine. And then on that Linux virtual machine, you're then basically able to install a lot of the container tools that you know and love. So as Phil mentioned, we're a big user of Containerd here at AWS. So we have Containerd as the container runtime. For the networking stack, we use the upstream CNI plugin. So you can kind of have multiple containers communicate with each other across a local Linux bridge, or you can publish a port and access it on your web browser if you're developing a web application or something like that. So therefore, when you want to run a container, what you're doing is you're basically passing the run command into the virtual machine and then using Containerd to run it in that environment. So it is all running locally. It is all happening on the machine. Okay. to build container images, we leverage the build kit toolchain. So for those that haven't come across that tool before, this is an awesome open source project that comes from the Moby project. So this is actually what sits behind Docker build. So if you've used like Docker build X or any of those tools, it's actually using build kit behind the scenes. And that's also what we've packaged up and we're using in Finch as well. So if you do Finch build and you give it a Docker file, you're going to get a container image out of it, and build kit is what is doing that. And then as I mentioned before, the one of the big pieces that we're using here is Lima, which is the piece that's managing the virtual machine. It starts, it stops, it handles all of the interactions between your laptop and in the virtual machine and back out again, so you don't have to use the old SSH tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, like it's quite funny. Like you use Finch as the interface, like the command line, and when we do some demos later on is Finch. But I like to think that Finch is kind of just like a packaging of all these awesome upstream projects. And it's quite funny when we were first like working on Finch, a lot of people were saying, well, there's not too much activity in the repo. And it's like, well, that's because all of the activities happening in the upstream projects that we package. It's like when you build a new feature for Finch, you're often building a new feature for like nerdctl, or you're building a new feature for Lima, and then we get to take advantage of it in Finch, but so does everybody else that uses those upstream projects.
Yep. That's the beauty of open source.
Yes, sir.
So we released this a year ago, and I did read, or at least come across, I didn't read all the blog all the time. I read a lot, but not that much in everything which comes out. But Phil, you put out a blog post not so long ago about the 1.0 version, and I'll put the link on this in the screen in a second. What were the improvements that we've done? Is as we've spoken about, making it faster, but what can you highlight for us about what was the good thing which you could say now ready for prime time to take flight?
Yeah, great question. So as Olly said, when we first launched the open source project, we knew there were rough edges. We knew that everything we wanted, wasn't complete. We knew there were some bugs, and so we've spent this year and done a series of point releases almost every month to add features. So, and like Olly said, the cool thing is how many features that our team contributed upstream, not to the Run Finch repo, but to Lima and nerdctl, things like container image signing and the Sochi support. So those were contributed to nerdctl. And then with more recent versions of Finch, we pulled in the latest release of nerdctl and were able to offer those features to Finch users. There were a series of improvements to the performance. Again, one of the things we really wanted to make sure is that, when someone's using Finch, it's not painful to wait for the VM to start or for it to install. And so a lot of improvements were made behind the scenes that may not be as exciting, but for a user are very valuable. And then, we know that obviously AWS customers are interested in using Finch. And so a few of the things we did is we put the ECR credential helper inside that VM. And so that makes it easier if you're pushing and pulling from ECR to get the enhancements that using a credential helper, just like you could use on a Linux system with Docker engine installed or containerd, you get that same value in Finch. We did some integrations with the CDK team so that when you have a CDK stack that has a Docker image asset, it can use Finch to build that image when you do a deploy over your CDK stack. So, that's a handful of things. We also, I think Olly mentioned it a few minutes ago, but we've been working upstream in Lima to add Windows support to Lima such that soon we can have Finch on Windows because as we mentioned, this is available on Mac OS today. So that work has also been ongoing. So yeah, there's been a lot of great work the team's been doing that both involve improvements to Finch and its packaging, but also contributing these features to nerdctl and Lima so that we can enhance what Finch is able to do and where it can run.
Ollie, is there anything you can show? Can you give us an example of how actually you use Finch? Will be the best thing so people can actually see how simple it is to actually use the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do that. I'll give a little bit of a shameless plug to the documentation, just because I kind of wrote it. But there's a nice sort of getting started guide. So for those that are using Finch for the first time, there's some nice guides there around like building your first image, running your first container. If you're someone that's used Compose before, and Compose is a way for you to define multiple containers and run them in a nice seamless way, then you can use that straight away with Finch as well. But if I switch over to my terminal, and so to interact with Finch today, Finch is a CLI only tool right now, and so the first thing you have to do after you've installed Finch, and as Phil mentioned, you can install Finch using the macOS package, or you can install it using Homebrew. You then need to start and stop the virtual machine. So just there's a whole syntax of Finch VM, which is how you kind of manage the life cycle of that virtual machine. So on first use, you initialize it, and then from there on out, you're kind of starting, stopping, and running your machine. So for me, for example, if I do the status, you can see that I have stopped virtual machine and then started up. I now have that Linux environment, and I'm ready to run my containers. Bigger, well, it's starting. And so this is where we're using the Lima tool set, and as I'm on a newer macOS build, actually using the virtualization framework to create the virtual machine that I'm going to use for running all of my containers. Now, the question that came in earlier on was like, how easy is it to use? If you've used like Docker before and you're familiar with the Docker command structure of like Docker build, Docker run, Docker push, Docker pull, then you don't have to learn anything new to get started with Finch. So for example, here I have a pretty simple a Docker file, like just builds Nginx from scratch, to be honest. But for me to create the container image from that, it's just Finch builds, you give it a tag and your context, and you're good to go. So those flags, that syntax is exactly the same. So you don't have to go and relearn your muscle memory. And then to run it, like once again, it's just Finch run, and if I publish the port and the container image name, there you go. I've run my container. The networking should be working, that I can access it in a browser. Like, there we go. So like nothing earth-shattering from a container demo. If you've built a container image before, if you've run a container image before, it looks identical, almost boring. But I think that's the point here, is that you can adopt Finch without starting from scratch.
And I might say something sacrilegious, but is it possible to make an alias that you don't have to change the command that you used to? In other words, alias Finch into Docker, which I used to do before with Lima CTL. So will that work?
It can work, and we have heard people do it. There's like some things that slightly unique to Finch, so like the way that I'm managing the virtual machine and way that you can generate support and stuff like that. But yeah, if you're following some guide from Stack
if you don't want to learn the new command name, but that should be very simple, so it shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, and I guess one thing to add there is that nerdctl has a great set of documentation for every command and every flag. Are they fully compatible? Is there still ongoing work? nerdctl is a maturing project, and so this month versus last month, there may be a command that didn't quite work properly or didn't have full compatibility that in the latest release does. And so their documentation is a great place to go understand, if you did that alias and something didn't work, that would be a great place. Yeah, this command reference is a great place to go see, well, maybe that's just not implemented properly in nerdctl yet, or someone's working on it.
Cool. There was a question which came up from Kyle Quest in the chat, if you don't mind. Is there ongoing work to make us a Finch and not only a CLI tool?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one we've got a few different times actually, and the first thing I'll say cheekily, Kyle, is if you don't mind jumping onto the repository and +1ing the issue, we love like feedback and how we prioritize what we build here at AWS, and what we're hoping to then transfer over into the Finch community is whatever people are interested in is what we'll work on and what we'll build. And so, yeah, we have had the request for a user interface for Finch, and it's definitely something we're investigating, and we're trying to work out what that means. Like, is it a user interface to manage the virtual machine? Is it a user interface to like help you containerize your application? So yeah, definitely something we're interested in, and definitely something we want to do at some point.
Cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So like that kind of shows you the simple experience on using Finch. To actually like configure Finch, we have a Finch configuration file. So there's a Finch configuration file that lives at finch.yaml, and this is where you can choose some of the kind of like under the hood, behind the scenes parts of the virtual machine. So if you wanted to change the hypervisor to QEMU from virtualization framework, you could do. If you wanted to change like the image management plugin we talked about before, whether that's Sochi or not, and this is where we configure it. And the reason why I bring this up at this point is that in my installation, I've enabled the ECR credential helper. And so what that means is that the container image that we've just built, I can then push pretty seamlessly up to ECR. The first thing I need to do is I need to retag it. And I just need to make sure I have the image URI set. I do. Nope. I'm going to grab my command. And so just retag it. And then I can just push that up.
You're missing an H in the beginning.
Oh, no way. So there we go.
Doing
push
it
that
live
up.
is always good.
to Amazon ECR. So like that's the full like build, the run, the push up to the registry experience. I appreciate those who are familiar with containers will have seen that hundreds of times, but the point is that we're kind of showing how Finch can be used as that drop-in replacement. Now, some of the other interesting things that we can do with Finch is right now I'm running on an Apple Silicon macOS machine, and as people are making that transition between the different architectures, we can take advantage of some of the awesome translation layers. And so when you actually saw in my Finch config, the last line there is Rosetta, and that's a translation layer from Apple that allows us to run x86 binaries on an Apple Silicon machine. So then, in theory, I could like run I can pass in a platform flag, run a x86 container image of, I don't know, let's say Ubuntu, and here I can then be developing or working on applications that are going to end up running on x86 in the data center or x86 in the cloud, but on my local macOS machine. I can do exactly the same when it comes to building container images as it is when running. So if I just look at like what architecture the container thinks it is, it thinks it's x86. When it's not,
you're actually running on Apple Silicon, the M1 or 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so when we did the build before, you can also pass in the platform flag, and we can natively build for other architectures as well.
Cool. There was a question which came from the chat from Ali. How do you interact with multiple registries and log into them? So, for example, I assume you do a Finch login to a different each repository. How does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, actually, I can, if you, in the documentation, there's like a registry authentication page, and so if the registry you're using supports authentication, like for example, you want to push up to Docker Hub, then just a Finch login with your username and password, and you're good to go. If you're using like a third-party registry or something like that, then it would be Finch login with the URL of where you're going, and username and password. So the same syntax that you used before, you can use with Finch. The integration that we've done on the ECR side is that there's a credential helper that helps you, so you don't have to do Finch login every time. And that's
to ECR.
To ECR, and that's what I had enabled in my config file.
Cool.
But there's nothing stopping you using Finch with any other container registry, running your containers anywhere. It's not building anything that's AWS specific.
Yeah, and I guess just to add to that, the same config.json that's been popularized by Docker and many others have copied it is supported here. So, that file that separates out the registries and credentials is also the same format that Finch uses.
Yeah, I was about to cat it, and then I realized I've probably got a token or two in there. So I probably don't want to show the credential file.
Not a good idea to show on the screen, which will be kept for prosperity from time until the eternity. But no. Phil, I think it's a question which you might be able to answer. Are there any gotchas or constraints with cross-architecture container image execution or building that our customers or our users or viewers need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I guess maybe not so much specific gotchas that would be about Finch or our specific bundling. People have been, doing this kind of thing with QEMU static, some of the features that have been there that allow you to do, we support Rosetta now, and as Olly showed, you can turn that on or off. I guess the one sort of common gotcha is that none of these translation layers are perfect, and people do hit bugs from time to time. I've got a very complicated binary, and somehow with Rosetta on, it fails, and with it off, it works. And obviously, performance it can be impacted by just the nature of doing these software, translation, architecture translation. But yeah, so I guess for our specific architecture support, it's fairly narrow in that it's ARM64 Linux and AMD 64 Linux. Obviously, you can use cross compilers to build other kinds of binaries. But as far as runtime execution, Finch is supporting Linux, x86 64 or AMD 64, and the 64-bit ARM, which includes, of course, Apple Silicon M1 and M2. And I don't know if anyone has their M3 yet, but let's assume it works. Until
we hope so, unless Apple did something weird that we didn't think of. But if they did, I assume the team which is working on Finch will be able to overcome it and fix it.
Sure.
And adapt as well if we need to. And there was a comment here from Pendo324. Yes, there is nothing stopping from anybody to add their own credential helpers. That's why it's an open source project. So raise an issue, submit a PR. If you want to add a different credential helper for something else, which is not currently on the screen, ECR at Docker Hub, we'd be more than happy to get that contribution for sure. Yes, definitely. Thank you very much.
I think I might recognize that username.
Yeah.
Before we go skiing down a slope towards the end of the end of the episode, which is still a bit away, but if you get the reference of skiing, Sochi, whatever it is, Winter Olympics, we talked about Sochi before. So there is, of course, we said there might be something unique about the fact that we added into Finch as well, which is Sochi compatible. Do you want to explain what that is?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about it at the beginning, but yeah. So one of the exciting areas of Containerd is around the snapshotters or the image management part of Containerd. And over the past couple of years, there's been lots of innovation around this concept of lazy loading. And this is the idea of, instead of downloading a container image up front, start the container almost instantaneously, and then as the application requires access to a file or a binary, go and get that from the registry just in time. And so as people end up with these really large container images, these big machine learning or data processing container images, the launch times on their production environments in their Kubernetes clusters or on AWS Fargate can be really quite long. And so a year ago, AWS announced an open source project called SQL OCI, or SOCI. And what SQL OCI does is it's an image management plugin for Containerd. That's the snapshotter piece. And you can inventory your container image so you know what's inside of it. And then when you run that container image on your production cluster, on your Kubernetes cluster, or on AWS Fargate, you can then start it so much quicker because we download the files just in time rather than downloading everything up front. And one of the things that we wanted to do on the Finch side is as this is where a lot of people are going to be doing their packaging of their container images, we wanted to integrate SOCI in there so that as people are creating their container images, they can also create their SOCI indexes, their inventories. And this is actually one of those examples of something that we contributed upstream. So we contributed to the NerdCTL project that then we can take advantage of in Finch, or if you're running on a Linux server and you're running in the cloud, then you can take advantage of it just within NerdCTL. So if I went back to that same container image that I just pushed up to ECR, if I add a snapshotter flag with the word SOCI, what it's going to do is it's going to try and repush the container image, but it's already there. It's then going to go and generate the SOCI index for me. And so this is the inventory of everything that is in the container image. And like one of the things that we did with SOCI is we made sure that when you inventory out a container image, you don't change the container image, but we still want to store the inventory somewhere logical. So we actually store it in the container repository alongside the image. So inside this simple flag here, what I've done is
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, I've listed out all the files in my container image, and then I've pushed that big inventory up to ECR. And so you can now see that there's a few more artifacts in the repository. And if I like take a look at one of these things, then it would be a SOCI inventory, SOCI index, sorry. Yeah. And on the flip side, if you wanted to lazy load the container image, you can do that with Finch as well. Like we have put the snapshotter on the VM. So if you did want to cool. On the flip side, then run it, you absolutely can do. It's more of a, I think that would probably be more in the development phase of packaging your application, like lazy loading to your laptop, because when you lazy load, there's like a constant connection to the registry, at least at the beginning. But it really helps when people want to use SOCI like in their production clusters to be able to get the same experience locally.
And as you said, we did a episode of this on Containers on the Couch about 2 months ago. And here's the link. And of course, it'll be in the show notes, or you can search on Containers on the Couch on YouTube and find the actual episode and go through it. It was actually with you and him and Himanshu. If I'm
yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Lots of demos that day as well.
That was true. And always, as we do our demos, we always do them live because that's the way we roll. What is the in Finch's future? I mean, you said you spoke a little bit about working on the Windows part. Is there anything else that you can share with the audience of people watching us? What we're thinking about? Of course, the feedback which you keep on providing us on the GitHub repository, which we continuously monitor, will be very, very helpful. But what have we kind of got on our vision?
Yeah, I think one thing we've talked about, and we even had a public community call to invite others to participate in like thinking about how this should look, how to design it, is an extensions framework. Many of the other tools in this space allow vendors and others to plug in capabilities into the developer workflow that may be of interest, container image scanning, or some other vendor capability that makes sense when you're developing or running a container locally and want to try something out. It also gives us a way that potentially, we want to keep Finch as a pure open source project that is not AWS centric, but extensions would allow us to maybe have an extension that allows you to then deploy that as a Fargate task, and that'd be something we want as an extension, not part of Finch's core project. And so, this is an area where, again, we'd love public comment, thoughts about what this should look like. Anything we're not thinking about how that should look. So that's definitely one area that's been on our minds. And yeah, I think just we've done a lot of the work to get all the right pieces together for Windows. So we're excited to provide that same capability for those that have Windows laptops using WSL2. So yeah, those are a couple things. I don't know if Olly has others that that are out there that we're considering.
Yeah, the Windows one always makes me laugh. Like I referenced at the beginning, but this is a JetBrains survey, and according to them, 61% of developers develop on Windows, and so we really want to help those developers use all the awesome container tooling that we package inside of Finch, and so that's absolutely on our radar. In terms of like what's coming, I saw Phil do an interesting tweet yesterday about some work he's been doing on some of the other Finch requests.
Yeah, so I've always known that Kind is Kubernetes in Docker. Kind is a very popular tool for Kubernetes developers who, again, are in that wanting that local environment to try out a Kubernetes YAML to deploy something to see if it works, to have that sort of inner development loop. And Kind has had, again, was built around Docker. It's in the name, Kubernetes in Docker. And over the years, Podman also added support. And so I thought, it'd be worth just seeing, how big is this distance between getting nerdctl or Finch capable to be the runtime used by Kind. And so the cool thing is that community had built a provider abstraction, I think, when Podman was looking to add their support. And so it's already nicely abstracted out. So within a day, I kind of hacked together a provider for nerdctl and actually got a Kubernetes cluster up and running, deployed an application, and it works. So I'm hoping to contribute that provider to Kind, and hopefully that'll fill a gap that is important to some set of developers who use Finch, but also would love to use Kind. And so hopefully we'll get that ironed out.
Cool.
And I just wanted to bring up the issue on the repo. So if you have requests on what you want to see in Finch or kind of get involved in the community, please jump onto the repo and create issues. Like here's one somebody from the community created about running a local Kubernetes cluster on Finch, and you can see people have started to +1 it. So yeah, same applies. Like if there's an existing issue that you want to see as well, jump on and hit the thumbs up. And if there's something else that you want to see that can help us prioritize, that'd be really useful too.
Brad had a question about Finch support for Docker file frontends. I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe you do, one of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually saw it in the demo, but yes. So the answer is yes. So Finch uses in the architectural diagram, it uses BuildKit behind the scenes, and so what that means is like through Finch, the Finch CLI or through nerdctl, like we actually expose most of the arguments that buildctl uses or BuildKit uses. So you can use any of really the features of BuildKit through Finch. So if you wanted to use Docker files as your front end, absolutely. If you wanted to use an alternative, that's also supported too if you go through the BuildKit documentation. And at the same time, if there's other features of BuildKit that you wanted to use, maybe some of the caching features, maybe some of the multi-architecture features, the alternative compression outputs that it uses, like there's the whole feature set of BuildKit is something that you can use through Finch. But yeah, if it's just a Docker file, yeah, absolutely, you can do that.
Thank you very much for the question, Brad.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're coming close to the end of our hour. I want to do kind of close up and see if you have anything else before we close it for the day. If you have anything else you would like to share. Start with you, Phil.
Yeah, so it's been cool to see a little uptick in it. We know we've had users of Finch since we launched it. It's been great. We've had great feedback. We've had some people contribute in various ways to Finch as an open source project. And with Finch 1.0, I feel like that's taken another kind of bump in the right direction. So I guess, I was at KubeCon a couple weeks ago and excited to see various people talking about Finch and excited about the project. And so what I'd love to see is, if you're interested in contributing or making Finch better, like this is completely an open source project with even the ability for us to have external maintainers someday. This is not something where we just, thought it up inside AWS and have some developers who just work on it. We really, truly would love to build a community around Finch. So if you have any interest, please reach out. We have a channel on CNCF Slack, which is just called Finch. That's a great place to reach out to us. Obviously, the repo has issues, PRs, discussions. But I'm most excited with the potential to see this grow and to see us have more external contributions and people participating, and maybe the extensions framework, even expands that. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
You, Ollie?
Yeah. From my side, very similar echo of Phil's comments. One thing I realized I didn't call out, which is a nice little line on the Finch website, but I think it's really impactful. Actually, do you want to show my screen real quick again?
Yeah.
Is that down here is that even though Finch is an open source project and it's completely free, just use Homebrew or download the macOS package. If you're having issues with Finch, you can obviously raise them on the GitHub issues, and we can help there. But if from a more, enterprise adoption perspective, if you have a support contract with AWS, you can use that support contract to get help with Finch. So like if you want to adopt Finch, but your boss is like we need to have backing, we need someone to support us, then you can raise tickets through the AWS support portal, and we can help you with Finch as well.
I didn't know that existed. It's very cool.
Yes, I should maybe shout about it a little bit more, but it's there.
We're coming up on reInvent. Are you going to be there, Ollie?
I am. Yeah. My first time in Vegas. I know, a little bit apprehensive.
Don't go
about
anywhere with a
going.
wallet. That's the most important thing.
I'm in Vegas, and so I'll be there. I have actually sessions on the Tuesday. I have a breakout Tuesday morning talking about lazy loading again. I realize I've talked about it quite a lot in a Finch session, but if you're there and you want to learn more about it, Tuesday morning I'm doing a breakout, and then Tuesday afternoon I'm actually doing a hands-on workshop with lazy loading and Sochi as well. So if you want to spend your Tuesday geeking out about container images, come find me.
You're the guy.
Yeah, and
Nice.
sadly, I will not be there this year. Kind of nice to take a break from Vegas for a week, but for that week. But if you are there, check out the modern application zone in the showcase, because a lot of the awesome open source container people will be around there, and I'm sure you can find some people happy to talk about Finch, including, I'm sure Olly will be spending some time there as well.
Yeah, I did put a few stickers in my bag. There is some Finch stickers floating around.
Yep.
Nice.
And I'll also be there if you want to learn a little bit more about how we actually built, or the building blocks or foundations of how we build ECS and all of our services within AWS as well. We're going to be doing a deep dive on the architecture, the resilience and availability of ECS. The session number, I think, is CON containers CON 401. So look it up if you're there. We'll be more than happy to have you there as our guests. And I'll also be there, of course, in the modern application zone on the show floor, and walking around everywhere. So please, if you do come across either Olly or myself, stop us, say hello, shake our hand. We don't bite. I think we don't bite. We'll be happy to say hello, discuss anything containers or Sochi or lazy loading or Finch or anything else, actually, to be honestly true. There's not going to be a show next week because it's what they call the night before reInvent, kind of. So we're not going to be doing a show next Thursday. Everybody's going to be busy with their heads down, getting ready for the event. And we will be back sometime in December to see you there with everybody. So thank you very much, Phil, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Olly, for joining us today. Thank you for enlightening us about the birds and the finches and the containers and everything else. And it was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day.